Worcester Mennonite Church, and welcome to week 5 in a year of God's story of grace. Congratulations for making it this far. It's fantastic that you are still tracking along as we learn more about what Scripture says. And I just want to reflect with you a little bit today about two main aspects of the biblical story. The first is Jacob and his transformation into Israel. And the second part is how Jacob's story finds fulfillment in the person of Jesus. And so, as we start with Jacob's story, we're going to be looking at several chapters from Genesis in the 20s and also into Genesis into the 30s. So, we'll be looking at Jacob's early beginnings. And the name Jacob comes from the Hebrew word akab, which means ankle. And when you look at the meaning of Jacob in that context, it's one who grabs at the ankle or a supplanter. And it's actually quite an apt name for Jacob, and particularly in the early part of his story, because we see he's a person who's trying to get ahead of his brother Esau. And they have this rivalry that really starts, as the biblical account says, at birth. And it continues on through their early adulthood. So Jacob is always trying to get ahead and receive the blessing and get what maybe he fears his brother might be able to acquire before him, which really is something of a character deficiency, as we see in the story, that he thinks that the only way that he can get blessing is by manipulation and conniving and using his own scheming. And there's, through a number of profound experiences, a transformation that happens in his thinking and in his heart. And we see that first with his dream that he has at Bethel. And we're told that in his dream, he sees this great ladder or stairway, and angels are going up and down the ladder. And it's a vision up into heaven. And he hears God's affirmation for the promise that was given to his father Abraham, that there would be a blessing up for Jacob's family and his descendants of a land, that they would be numerous as a people, and that all nations would be blessed through them. But a very important part of that vision is the words that come towards the end when God says, "And I am with you." And it's starting to shift in Jacob and his thinking from, how can I get ahead in life by my cleverness and my own scheming, to what does it mean that God is with me and he has reaffirmed my connection with my grandfather and the promise he had with my grandfather Abraham, that I'm going to be part of this blessed people, and there's a provision for me and for my family. And starting to shift the focus away from his action to what God is going to do. And his journey continues forward and really goes even deeper in this realization at the Jabbok River, where he wrestles with an angel. And it's through this encounter, and he wrestles through the night, and he doesn't let go. He wants the angel to bless him. And finally, the angel touches his hip and it injures his hip. And the angel, through God's authority, renames Jacob from the one who grasps at the heel, the supplanter, to Yisrael, which in Hebrew, the verb sarah is to contend or to wrestle. And El is a shortened form of the word Elohim, which means God. So his name is changed from the supplanter to the one who wrestles with God. And that's significant because it says he's gone from being conniving and trying to make his own way in life to one who has encountered God and been changed. And as he wrestles with God, now he'll live the rest of his life with a limp, as the angel touched his hip And that limp will remind him that he is dependent on God. It has not only humbled him, but it's given him a new sense of dependence and identity. It's no longer Jacob, the planner and conniver. It's now Israel, the one who depends on God's provision and who's learned that through that humbling experience of wrestling. So, the final part in Jacob's story in our readings this week, we'll see, is something very profound that you don't always see in life, but is a wonderful and redemptive part of this biblical story, is a reconciliation between these brothers who have lived at enmity. And as Jacob is going back to his homeland, he's not sure how Esau is going to relate to him. And he's concerned about that. And so he sends all these gifts ahead to his brother. And we have to remember Jacob is changed. He's no longer just the supplanter. Now he's somebody who's been humbled by these experiences with God. And when he comes to Esau, Esau embraces him. And as they greet one another, he senses Esau's love and care and forgiveness. And as he looks at his brother, he says, looking at your face is like looking at the face of God. And there's this profound moment that there is something special and unique in the action of forgiveness. It's transformative, and there's something about that that speaks deeply to the nature of who God is. And that will take us then to the second part of what we're looking at today, the story of Jesus and his offering of himself for us on the cross. And we have this story today told from Luke's gospel, and there are two moments that I want to highlight from it. The first is at the beginning of the story as Jesus has been crucified and there are people mocking him. Even the Roman soldiers around him are mocking. And Jesus prays to the Father and he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they are doing." Now, it's so profound to think about how Jesus interrupts the cycle of hatred and violence that we would expect as human beings. One would think that somebody in Jesus' position would not be praying for those who have created his suffering, but he looks to them with forgiveness. And as we see at the end of the story, one of the thieves crucified next to him joins in with the mocking of the crowd, but the other thief rebukes the first thief and turns to Jesus. And Jesus says to him, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Now, it's a powerful moment, and it should help us see that Jesus has the power to save and to forgive. And in a moment of utter desperation, this thief who has made most likely many mistakes in his life, and he turns to Jesus, and Jesus is able to forgive and save him and reach him with hope. And it is like the story of Jacob and Esau. When Jacob was forgiven by Esau, he said, "Looking at your face is like looking at the face of God." And when the thief looks at Jesus, Jesus embodies that at its fullest extent. And as he looks at Jesus' face, he finds forgiveness and he looks into the face of God. Jesus becomes the ultimate act of, of grace on God's part to disrupt the cycle of violence and the cycle of unforgiveness and strife that exists amongst human beings. And the story of Jacob and Esau is a microcosm of that. But as we push that out to the broader story of humanity, Jesus is coming and living on this earth and offering up of himself is meant to be that great act of love on God's behalf that brings another pathway out of the cycle of violence and despair and brokenness and sin. So as we finish our readings for this week, I hope that as we've continued to make connections between the story of Genesis and the story of Jesus, that you have found inspiration in the richness and the depth of the love of the story of what Jesus is doing in the New Testament and how it is such a fulfillment of what was promised so many years before to Abraham and to others in the Old Testament. And I hope that you'll continue to journey with me as we learn more about Scripture and grow together. And until next time, goodbye.